What happens when the most beloved man in Hollywood walks into a studio expecting kindness only to face a public ambush designed to break him? In a single live broadcast, dignity collides with arrogance, and one quiet voice silences an entire panel. But what Keanu Reeves said next, no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The studio fell silent. Cameras that moments ago had captured light banter now locked onto one image. Keanu Reeves standing beside his chair, removing the microphone from his sweater with slow, deliberate precision. The sound of the clip detaching from the fabric echoed faintly in the heavy air. Across the table, Joy Behar sat frozen, her painted smile collapsing into confusion. Her co-hosts Whoopi, Sunny, Sarah, and Alyssa exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something irreversible had just happened. The audience, unsure whether this was scripted or real, stopped clapping mid-motion. Someone in the control room whispered, "Keep rolling." Keanu's eyes swept the studio, calm but unyielding. He wasn't angry, he wasn't loud, he didn't need to be. The strength in his silence filled every corner of the room. It was the silence of a man who'd been underestimated one time too many. The audience leaned forward in their seats. The tension was unbearable. Every heartbeat seemed amplified through the microphones. He looked at Joy not with hatred, but with disappointment. "I came here in good faith," he said, quietly, his voice steady, resonant. "But I won't be part of this performance." He placed the microphone on the table, its small red light flickering out. "If respect is a stage act, then I'm leaving the play." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One woman covered her mouth. Someone shouted his name, desperate to stop him from walking away. But Keanu didn't stop. He straightened his shoulders, gave one last measured glance toward the hosts, and turned toward the exit. The camera panned with him, following every step as the studio lights shimmered against his black sweater. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or remain silent. Joy Behar tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "You're just running away?" Her words broke halfway through, her tone unsteady. Keanu paused at the edge of the stage. He turned slightly, his face half-shadowed under the studio lighting. "No," he said softly. "I'm standing my ground." That single line hit like a thunderclap. The audience erupted, some clapping, others shouting, many rising to their feet. The moment was raw, unfiltered, and real. The control room panicked, cutting to commercials that came 3 seconds too late. Millions of viewers across the country were left staring at their screens, watching an icon of humility and restraint walk away from confrontation with quiet strength. Then everything froze his image. The stunned panel, the glow of the studio lights fading. A voiceover echoed in the silence that followed. How did it come to this? The story rewinds to the beginning. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning, a simple guest appearance on a talk show. Keanu Reeves, the man loved by millions for his grace both on and off screen, had agreed to an interview about his new film. The producers promised a friendly segment. But unseen behind the camera, something darker had been planned. Something meant to challenge not just his beliefs, but his dignity. The day began like any other in the world of daytime television, but before noon, it would turn into one of the most unforgettable confrontations in live broadcast history. Hours earlier, the studio hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Assistants hurried across polished floors, balancing trays of coffee cups and papers. The air smelled faintly of hairspray and bright studio lights, the scent of television perfection. Behind every door, producers whispered over clipboards, finalizing questions, double-checking camera angles, rehearsing transitions. They had no idea that this morning would make television history. In the green room, Keanu Reeves sat quietly, detached from the commotion. He wore a dark gray sweater and jeans, understated as always. His posture was relaxed, almost meditative. He didn't scroll through his phone or talk loudly like other guests might. Instead, he held a small, well-worn book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He flipped a page, smiled faintly at a passage about dignity and restraint, then closed it and exhaled. A young production assistant entered timidly. "Mr. Reeves, we'll be ready for you in 10. Keanu looked up, his expression warm. "Thank you, Emily," he said, remembering her name from their brief introduction that morning. It startled her. Most guests didn't. She smiled nervously and nodded, realizing she'd just witnessed something small yet profoundly kind. In the hallway outside, Joy Behar's laughter rang out, sharp and unmistakable. She stood with a producer, flipping through her cue cards, her tone brimming with confidence. "I want to ask the real questions," she said. "None of that movie fluff. If he's going to sit here pretending to be humble, let's see what happens when he's pushed." The producer hesitated. "Joy, just don't go too hard. The network wants this to stay positive." She waved him off with a dismissive flick of her hand. "Relax, he's a big boy. He can handle it." Inside the studio, the audience began to take their seats. Most had come to see Keanu, many clutching small posters or hoping for a quick photo. There was a warmth in the air, a shared affection that no celebrity manufactured. To them, Keanu represented decency in an industry that had forgotten what that looked like. As the countdown began 5 minutes to, the hosts settled into their chairs. Whoopi reviewed her notes carefully, aware of the chemistry that could shift with a single wrong tone. Sunny adjusted her tablet, scrolling through headlines about celebrity responsibility and activism. Sarah smiled faintly at the audience, doing her best to project calm despite sensing tension brewing beside her. Then there was Joy. Her eyes were sharp, her expression unreadable. She tapped her pen against the table, rehearsing her lines in her mind. She was a veteran of confrontation, and she could feel the anticipation of her audience like static in the air. Backstage, Keanu was escorted to the side of the stage. The lights were blinding even from behind the curtain. He took a slow breath, brushing a hand through his dark hair. In his calm, there was no arrogance, only readiness. When the stage manager raised his hand, signaling 30 seconds, Keanu smiled to himself. He had no reason to expect hostility. For him, it was just another day. Another conversation about the things he cared about: art, kindness, purpose. But beyond that curtain, someone had already decided to turn that kindness into a test. The red, on-air light flicked on. Whoopi's practiced warmth filled the air. "Welcome, everyone. We've got a very special guest today, the one and only Keanu Reeves." The audience roared, clapping and cheering louder than the studio had expected. Even the sound engineers smiled through their headsets. Keanu stepped onto the stage, his movements calm but purposeful. Every gesture was measured, no grand wave, no exaggerated grin, just a simple nod of appreciation as he passed rows of eager fans. Someone shouted, "We love you, Keanu," and he smiled genuinely, responding with a quiet, "Thank you." He shook hands with Whoopi first, then Sunny, Sarah, and Alyssa. When he reached Joy, she stayed seated. Her handshake was brisk, almost dismissive. He noticed it but didn't react. He'd been in the mind industry long enough to recognize the chill of hostility disguised as professionalism. As he took his seat, the lighting softened. The stage crew signaled the first question. Whoopi started gently, asking about The Guardian, Redemption, his latest film. Keanu talked about the themes of forgiveness and purpose, his voice calm, thoughtful. "It's about second chances," he said, "about people trying to do the right thing even when no one's watching." The audience applauded. Joy smiled, but her eyes didn't. She waited for her moment, rehearsing her strike behind that polite expression. The conversation drifted to his charitable foundation, his work in children's hospitals, and his long career. Keanu deflected praise with the humility that defined him. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about the people doing the work every day." Then, without warning, the air shifted. Joy leaned forward, voice slicing through the easy tone. "That's all well and good, Keanu," she said sharply. "But why don't you ever take a stand on real issues? You've built this saintly image, but some people think it's just an act. Are you afraid to speak up?" The studio went silent. The audience froze mid-applause. The change in tone was so abrupt, it felt like a glass breaking. Keanu blinked, surprised, but not rattled. "I believe in action over appearance," he said calmly. "I don't think doing good needs to come with a press release." Joy smirked. "So silence is your moral position?" Whoopi shifted uneasily in her chair. Sarah looked down. Alyssa's eyes darted nervously between them. Keanu's posture straightened slightly. "If listening before speaking is silence," he replied evenly, "then I'll take silence over shouting." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The atmosphere thickened with tension. Yet Keanu's tone remained steady, his gaze unwavering. Joy leaned back, her jaw tight. She didn't realize it yet, but the balance in. The room had already shifted. At that moment, the camera lingered on Keanu's calm face, the face of a man who understood that this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a battle of principles. And when the world later replayed this moment millions of times, they would remember that quiet expression, not of anger, not of fear, but of absolute resolve. Sometimes the quietest man in the room carries the loudest truth. The morning sun rose over Manhattan like a floodlight, pouring through the glass towers that framed the city skyline. The air was brisk, the streets alive with the rhythm of a new day. Outside ABC Studios, a line of fans had already formed along the barricades, clutching posters, phones, and coffee cups, hoping for a glimpse of the man who'd somehow made humility a form of fame. Inside the building, the hum of production energy filled every corridor. Assistants hurried with clipboards, producers barked through headsets, and the studio floor glowed under the reflection of perfectly polished lights. A giant banner in the lobby read, "The View Live Today," with Keanu Reeves' face smiling from the screen beneath it. At 8:03 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and Keanu stepped out quietly. He wasn't surrounded by publicists or bodyguards. Just him, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder, his calm presence grounding the whirlwind around him. He greeted the security guard first, a graying man named Hank who'd been standing post for 20 years. "Morning, Hank," Keanu said with that familiar warmth. The guard's face lit up in surprise. "You remember my name?" "Of course," Keanu replied simply. "You were here the last time I came through." He moved through the lobby, pausing to hold the door open for a camera assistant juggling cables. "You're good. Go ahead," he said. The small gestures were second nature to him, tiny, effortless moments that carried weight because they were real. In the hallway, a young intern nearly dropped a tray of coffee cups. Keanu caught one before it spilled, steadying the tray. "You're doing great," he said, his tone kind, not performative. The intern blushed, nodding quickly, and hurried off toward the studio. When he reached the green room, the chaos softened. It was a space designed for calm, muted colors, fruit bowls, bottled water, and television monitors showing the morning news. Keanu placed his bag on the chair, loosened his jacket, and took out a small paperback. The cover was creased, the edges worn. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He read quietly, his focus steady even as a makeup artist entered to check if he needed touch-ups. "You're fine," she said after a glance. "Always are." Keanu smiled. "That's kind of you. I just need a moment to breathe." Across the hallway, the mood couldn't have been more different. Joy Behar was in her dressing room, seated at a vanity, surrounded by mirrors and light bulbs. Her makeup artist brushed blush onto her cheeks as Joy flipped through her cue cards with growing irritation. She wasn't interested in small talk or the day's entertainment topics. Her focus was on one thing: today's guest. Joy Behar's voice cut through the hum of the dressing room. "He's a nice guy, sure," she said, her tone laced with cynicism. "But that's exactly why it'll make waves. Everyone's too afraid to challenge him." She flipped another cue card sharply, scanning her notes like a prosecutor reviewing evidence. "If he's really as wise as people say, let's see how he handles a little truth." Her assistant, Marcy, hesitated behind her, unsure whether to agree. "You mean the segment about celebrity responsibility?" Joy nodded, dabbing her lipstick with a tissue. "That's the one. I'm tired of all these actors pretending neutrality is some noble stance. Silence is a choice, and choices have consequences. I'm not attacking him, I'm revealing him." Marcy's Eyes flickered toward the hallway where she could hear laughter from the crew. He's not like the others, Joy. He doesn't do politics. People love him because he stays out of it. Joy turned, her reflection in the mirror, sharp under the light. Exactly. That's what makes this interesting. The audience loves him too much. Let's see how much they love him when he refuses to take a stand on the issues they claim to care about. Her assistant didn't reply. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Joy returned to her cards. In her mind, this wasn't cruelty, it was accountability. But even she could feel the faint buzz of something dangerous about to unfold. Meanwhile, down the hall, Keanu continued reading. The passage in his hand spoke about composure under provocation, about choosing principle over ego. He closed the book gently and smiled to himself. It was as if the words had been written for this very day. A knock came at the door. "Mr. Reeves, they're ready for you in pre-stage." Keanu nodded, placing the book back in his bag. "Thank you." He stood, straightened his jacket, and looked around the room for a moment before leaving. The calm in his movements contrasted with the electric tension humming just outside. As he stepped into the hallway, a lighting technician accidentally bumped into him, nearly dropping a stand. "I'm so sorry, sir." "No harm done," Keanu said easily, steadying the equipment with one hand. His tone was light, reassuring. "You've got a busy job. Don't worry about it." He moved on, passing producers who whispered into earpieces, crew members adjusting cameras, and interns racing to meet last-minute demands. Everyone seemed to orbit around him, yet he carried himself as if none of it revolved around his fame. At the far end of the hall, Joy stepped out of her dressing room just as Keanu rounded the corner. For a brief moment, they met halfway. She smiled tightly, the kind of smile that carried more calculation than warmth. "Morning, Keanu. Ready for a lively chat?" He smiled back, unaware of the undercurrent in her tone. Always ready for good conversation. Joy's eyes flicked briefly to his book peeking out of the bag. "Meditations." She smirked faintly. "Let's hope you remember those meditations when we start talking." Keanu nodded politely and kept walking toward the studio doors, unaware that she'd just foreshadowed a battle that would test every principle he lived by. Inside Studio 3B, the air pulsed with the anticipation of live television. Every second before a broadcast was choreographed chaos. Stagehands darted between cameras, floor producers shouted instructions, and the director's voice crackled through the headset, rehearsing cues for applause, commercial breaks, and camera pans. The sound of laughter echoed from the audience holding area, where studio attendants prepped them with smiles and signs that read "Applause" in bright red letters. Keanu walked through the backstage tunnel calmly, a quiet contrast to the frenzy surrounding him. Crew members greeted him warmly as he passed. "Morning, Mr. Reeves. Big fan, sir. Can't wait to see the segment." Each time, he nodded, replying softly, "Thank you," or "Appreciate it." To some, it seemed like habit. To those who watched closely, it was sincerity. He stopped briefly beside a janitor kneeling near a cart, tightening the handle of a mop bucket. The man looked up, startled. "Didn't expect to see you here, Mr. Reeves." Keanu smiled faintly. "You're keeping the place shining. You make us all look good." The man chuckled, embarrassed, mumbling something about just doing his job. Keanu clapped him gently on the shoulder before moving on. In the control room, multiple screens displayed camera angles of the stage. One monitor zoomed in on the empty guest chair, where Keanu would sit in less than 10 minutes. The lighting tech adjusted the spotlight intensity, while the audio engineer tested the microphone labeled Reeves. Everything appeared routine, except for the undercurrent of unease running through the team. The producers had received last-minute changes from Joy Behar herself. She had insisted on revising the questions. "Are we really going with this list?" a junior producer asked, flipping through the cue cards. "Half these topics aren't cleared by PR. He's expecting a promotional segment." Joy's voice cut through from the studio floor. "You want safe television? Watch cartoons. We do conversations that matter here." Whoopi Goldberg overheard her as she adjusted her chair at the panel. Her tone was even, but her eyes showed fatigue. "Joy, let's keep it balanced. The man's here to talk about his movie. We can have a discussion, but we don't need fireworks." Joy gave a sharp grin. "I'm not planning fireworks, Whoopi. I'm planning honesty. Sunny Hostin joined them, sliding her tablet onto the desk. Honesty's good, she said carefully, as long as it doesn't feel like an ambush. Joy didn't respond. She was already scanning her notes again, mentally rehearsing the pivot that would turn a simple question about charity into a confrontation about moral duty. From behind the curtain, Keanu could see the outline of the hosts under the stage lights. He heard faint snippets of laughter from the audience filing in. He rubbed his hands together once, not nervously, but as if preparing to center himself. When the stage manager finally called out, "We're live in 2 minutes," Keanu exhaled slowly. He glanced again at his worn copy of Meditations resting on a side table. One line from the morning's reading echoed in his mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The words lingered as he stepped toward the bright white glow of the stage. Behind him, unseen, Joy Behar adjusted her microphone and smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. None of the producers, not even Whoopi, realized what was about to unfold. Within the hour, that same studio would erupt into the most talked about moment in modern television. But for now, the cameras waited. The crowd whispered in excitement, and the calm before the storm held steady, one breath before the break. Backstage, the air was thick with a quiet kind of electricity. It wasn't excitement, it was tension, the kind that settles in the chest before a storm breaks. Every staff member could feel it. The laughter that usually filled the minutes before the view went live was missing. Conversations were short, glances were sharper, and somewhere behind the smiles, there was unease. Whoopi Goldberg sat in her moderator's chair, reading over her notes with the steady focus of someone who'd seen too many unpredictable mornings. Her pen tapped lightly against the paper as her eyes flicked toward Joy Behar's seat. Something in Joy's posture, her fixed smile, her unblinking stare at the cue cards told Whoopi this wasn't going to be a normal show. Sarah Haynes, sitting 2 seats down, could sense it too. She'd worked on television long enough to recognize the weight in the air when someone came to prove a point rather than have a conversation. She reached for her coffee, her hand trembling slightly. "Does anyone else feel that?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice light. Alyssa Farah Griffin, the youngest of the hosts, glanced up from her phone and gave a nervous smile. "Feel what?" Sarah lowered her voice. "Like we're about to walk into a minefield." Alyssa leaned closer. "You mean Joy?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, she's been quiet. Too quiet." Across the table, Joy Behar was flipping through her cue cards for the 3rd time. Her lips moved slightly as she rehearsed the phrasing of her questions. If you have a platform, responsibility, silence isn't neutral, she murmured to herself. Then she looked up, catching Sarah's glance. "You're nervous, Sarah?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just the usual pre-show jitters." Joy gave a small smirk. "Don't worry, this will be good television." Her tone made Whoopi look up. "Joy," she said slowly, "you remember this is an entertainment segment, right? He's here to talk about The Guardian, redemption. We're not hosting a debate." Joy shrugged, her voice sharp with false nonchalance. "Aren't we supposed to talk about things that matter? The world doesn't need another celebrity selling a movie. Maybe it needs one who stands for something." Sunny Hostin, seated beside her, was scrolling through her tablet, the glow reflecting off her glasses. "She's not wrong, Whoopi. It's a chance to have a meaningful conversation." Whoopi sighed quietly. "Meaningful is fine. Ambush isn't." Joy didn't respond. She just sat back in her chair, twirling her pen, her mind already racing ahead to the segment she had rewritten without telling anyone. The stage manager's voice called from behind the camera wall. 5 minutes, everyone. We're going live in 5. Alyssa leaned closer to Sarah again. "Is Joy really going there today?" Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. Joy's silence said enough. The control room was a hive of motion. Technicians hovered over monitors showing multiple camera angles, switching views between the host's table, the audience risers, and the hallway where Keanu would make his entrance. Red and green indicator lights blinked in rapid rhythm, While producers exchanged quick looks over the headsets, something felt off, though no one could quite name it. Marla, the senior producer, stood with her arms crossed, watching Joy through the glass panel. She had worked with this team for years and knew Joy's moods like a weather forecast. The smirk on Joy's face wasn't confidence, it was anticipation. That kind of look usually meant she was about to cross a line. "Did she show you her question cards?" a junior producer asked quietly. Marla shook her head. "She said she updated them for flow. I didn't have time to check." Another voice chimed in through the headset. "I'm getting feedback that the guest's PR rep wants us to avoid anything political." Marla frowned. "Then we definitely should have reviewed those cards." On the stage, Joy adjusted her microphone and turned slightly to Sunny. "You're backing me up if this turns heated, right?" Sunny nodded, distracted by her tablet. "Of course. We'll just steer it toward accountability. Keep it civil." "Civil's overrated," Joy said under her breath. Whoopi caught it. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. "Let's not make this another viral headline, okay? We've had enough of those this year." Joy smiled, as if the warning amused her. "Whoopi, relax. You think I'd pick a fight with Keanu Reeves, America's sweetheart?" "Exactly," Whoopi said, her eyes steady. "That's why you should tread carefully. Everyone loves him, and not for fake reasons. He's not the guy to corner." Joy's lips curled. "We'll see." In the audience pit, stagehands guided guests into their seats. The warm-up host cracked jokes and told them when to clap, when to cheer. It was a cheerful routine until someone noticed the atmosphere. The laughter sounded a bit strained, a little unsure. The buzz that usually floated through the room before showtime was replaced with the weight of unspoken expectation. Alyssa fidgeted with her pen, glancing down the table again. "What if it backfires?" she whispered toward Sarah. "People love him. If it turns ugly, the audience will hate it." Sarah looked down at her cue sheet. "It always backfires when someone comes in angry." 10 minutes, shouted the stage manager. Joy leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms like a prize fighter before a bout. She closed her cue cards and smiled faintly. "Sometimes the truth needs a little mess," she said. Behind the curtain, Keanu Reeves was waiting. He couldn't hear the tension building on stage, but he could feel it in the air, that strange current that tells you something's coming. He adjusted his jacket, exhaled slowly, and nodded to the stage assistant who whispered, "You're up next." The final minute before going live arrived like the ticking of a bomb. The bright studio lights flared, casting a white-hot glow across the stage. Every reflection in the glass desk shimmered like water. The audience had quieted down, waiting for the opening applause signal. Behind the curtain, Keanu stood motionless, his breathing steady, his hands folded loosely before him. A sound technician adjusted his lapel mic one last time. "You're all set, Mr. Reeves," the man said, his voice slightly trembling. "We're live in 60. Keanu nodded, his gaze calm. "Thanks for your help." It was the kind of simple acknowledgement that carried weight because he meant it. The technician smiled, visibly relieved by the small kindness. On stage, the tension thickened. Joy straightened the stack of cue cards in front of her. Each question she'd written had been designed like a chess move, precise, provoking, and deliberate. She had rehearsed her tone, her phrasing, even her pauses. This wasn't conversation, it was strategy. Whoopi looked toward the control booth, her instincts uneasy. "We good?" she asked through her mic. "Rolling in 30?" came the voice from above. Sunny glanced down at her tablet again, scrolling through data points she might need to back up Joy's eventual pivot into politics. Sarah rubbed her temples. "This feels wrong," she whispered to Alyssa. Alyssa leaned in. Joy said she just wants an honest talk. Joy's version of honest gets people fired, Sarah muttered. The floor director raised his fingers, 5, 4, 3, 2, then pointed toward the hosts. The theme music blasted through the studio. The bright yellow logo of The View flashed across the screens. The audience burst into applause on cue. Whoopi's smile was professional, but the lines around her eyes tightened. "Welcome back to The View, everyone," We've got a packed show this morning, and a guest the world absolutely adores. Please welcome the one and only Keanu Reeves. The curtain parted. Keanu stepped forward into the flood of white light. The crowd erupted. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, shouting his name. Some waved photos or phone screens for him to sign. He smiled warmly, a quiet gratitude in his expression. He shook Whoopi's hand first, then Sunny's, Sarah's, and Alyssa's. When he reached Joy, she stayed seated, clapping slowly, her smile too tight. "Welcome, Keanu," she said, her tone neutral. "Thanks for having me," he replied. As he took his seat, the applause faded. For a fleeting moment, the room seemed peaceful again. Cameras panned across smiling faces, and the hosts began their usual introductions. But under that calm, an invisible storm was forming. The director's voice crackled through the headset. "We're live. Segment 1, rolling." Whoopi launched into the first question about the Guardian, redemption. Keanu responded thoughtfully, his voice carrying that trademark calm, deep, deliberate, and kind. Laughter and applause returned, warming the room again. Only Joy stayed quiet, her fingers drumming against her cue cards like the ticking of a clock. Her turn was coming, and when it did, the world would stop to listen. The lights softened, casting a golden hue over the stage. As the applause sign blinked red, Whoopi Goldberg's voice carried through the studio, smooth and practiced. "We are so thrilled to have this next guest with us. He's an actor, a producer, and one of the most beloved figures in Hollywood. Please welcome the incredible Keanu Reeves." The audience roared. The reaction was immediate and electric. People stood up, clapping and cheering, their faces lit with excitement. Several held up their phones, capturing the moment. One fan shouted from the second row, "We love you, Keanu!" And the crowd erupted again, laughter mingling with applause. Keanu stepped onto the stage, casual as ever jeans, a black sweater over a gray shirt, his dark hair falling naturally to his shoulders. There was no theatrics, no celebrity flourish. He simply smiled, gave a small wave, and nodded in appreciation. He carried himself with that quiet steadiness that seemed to calm everyone around him. Whoopi stood to greet him, shaking his hand warmly. "So great to see you again," she said. "Good to see you too, Whoopi," he replied, his tone genuine. "Thanks for having me." As he made his way down the row of co-hosts, the audience noticed how he greeted each of them with equal grace. Sunny received a polite handshake and a soft smile. Sarah looked genuinely excited, and Keanu laughed as she said, "I told my husband this is the only day he can't call me. I'm busy meeting Keanu Reeves." The crowd laughed. Alyssa offered an enthusiastic welcome, clearly a fan herself. Then came Joy Behar. She remained seated as he extended his hand. Her smile was brief, polite, almost mechanical. "Nice to have you," she said flatly. "Nice to be here," Keanu replied with unshaken calm, then took his seat. The camera zoomed in on his face, the faint smile, the gentle lines around his eyes, that natural humility that made people feel like they were sitting with an old friend rather than a superstar. Whoopi led the conversation easily. "So, Keanu, you've been at this a long time. 3 decades of movies, and now The Guardian. Redemption is breaking records around the world. Tell us about this one." Keanu's expression brightened slightly. "This film means a lot to me," he said. "It's about a man who's lost everything, his family, his purpose, and he's trying to rebuild without anger. It's not about revenge or power. It's about redemption, about finding grace in struggle." The audience quieted. They weren't just listening. They were connecting. Keanu's sincerity pulled them in like gravity. "We did a lot of our own stunts," he continued, smiling faintly. "I'm not as young as I used to be, so it took a few ice packs." The audience laughed warmly, and for a few minutes, the set felt alive with ease. Cameras panned across the smiling faces of the hosts. Everyone seemed relaxed, everyone except Joy. Her pen tapped lightly against her stack of cue cards, rhythmic and deliberate, the sound almost drowned by laughter. Her eyes never left Keanu. She was waiting. Sarah leaned forward with genuine excitement. You've done some intense action scenes over the years, but there's always so much emotion behind them. What keeps you coming back to those kinds of roles? Keanu smiled, his voice soft, yet confident. I think it's about the humanity in them, he said. The explosions and fights get people in the seats, but what makes them stay is the heart. Every punch, every chase, every fall, there's something deeper underneath. Pain, purpose, sometimes even forgiveness. The audience nodded and murmured in appreciation. They were hearing something different from the usual Hollywood interview script. He wasn't promoting himself. He was reflecting, as if every word was weighed before it left his mouth. Sunny chimed in, her tone more analytical. You've mentioned before that you try to find compassion even in darker characters. That's unusual in an industry obsessed with heroes and villains. Why is that? Keanu thought for a moment before answering. Because no one's entirely one thing. Life isn't black and white. Everyone's fighting a battle you can't see. I think real strength is having empathy, even when you don't agree with someone. There was a brief silence, one of those rare moments in television when no one dared interrupt because the truth hung too heavy to rush past. The audience began to applaud, not the forced kind the stage director signaled for, but something organic, rising naturally from the room. Whoopi glanced at the crowd, then back at Keanu, smiling. You've got a way with words. You're gonna make the rest of us look bad. Keanu chuckled. I don't know about that. The laughter broke the tension, and the mood lightened again. Alyssa jumped in, clearly enjoying herself. You also have one of the most famous reputations in Hollywood for being just a really nice guy. There's a million stories online giving up your seat on the subway, donating to hospitals, even secretly funding people's projects. Is that all true? Keanu looked a little embarrassed, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know about all of that. I just try to be decent. Life's hard enough. If you can make someone's day a little easier, that's worth more than a headline. The audience clapped again, louder this time. One woman in the back shouted, "We need more people like you." Keanu smiled modestly, lowering his gaze for a second before looking back up. There are plenty of people like that already. They just don't get the camera pointed at them. Sarah laughed softly. You're too humble. Joy's pen tapped again, tap, tap, tap. She hadn't said a word since the introduction. Her jaw was tight, her gaze locked on him. Whoopi, sensing the rhythm of the show, kept the questions flowing. Tell us something from behind the scenes. There's a rumor you did your own motorcycle stunt in this one. Keanu's face lit up with an amused grin. Yeah, that's true. The director wasn't thrilled about it. Said I was too old to be doing that kind of thing. The audience laughed again. The warmth returned, but on the edge of that laughter, something cold began to stir. Joy was still silent, but the look in her eyes said she was winding the clock for her moment. Whoopi leaned in with an easy laugh. Too old? You're aging better than most of us in this room. The audience burst into applause again. Keanu laughed quietly, shaking his head. That's kind of you to say, but I still feel it in my knees every morning. The laughter grew louder, filling the space with warmth. The conversation flowed naturally, genuine, and lighthearted. The producers in the control room relaxed. The show felt smooth, effortless, exactly the kind of television they wanted, until one camera operator noticed something unusual. Joy wasn't smiling. Her pen kept tapping against the glass table in a steady rhythm, faster now, almost like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Sunny took over next, her tone turning thoughtful. You've been in this industry for decades, but you've never really changed. You're still low-key, still grounded. How do you stay that way when everyone around you seems obsessed with fame? Keanu gave a small, thoughtful nod. Maybe it's because I don't see fame as something to hold on to. I've lost people I love. I've been through things that reminded me how temporary everything is. The only thing that lasts is what you give away: kindness, time, respect. That line landed. The room went silent for a beat before another wave of applause filled the air. Several people in the audience looked emotional. A woman dabbed her eyes. Even Whoopi seemed moved. See, that's why people love you, she said softly. You remind folks of what actually matters. Keanu smiled gently. We all need reminders sometimes. Alyssa leaned toward him. Your charity work, especially for kids in hospitals, it's so inspiring. Do you ever think about writing a book about your experiences? He shook his head, smiling modestly. I'd rather live them than write about them. More applause. The energy in the studio rose again. It was the perfect moment, the kind of segment that builds warmth between guest and audience, the kind that networks replay for inspiration. But not everyone was feeling inspired. Joy's pen hit the table one last time before she set it down. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now, forced. Whoopi caught the subtle shift. Years of moderating had taught her what a coiled spring looked like. She knew what was coming. Sarah noticed too. Her cheerful posture stiffened. Alyssa kept glancing at Joy's notes. The crew members behind the cameras exchanged glances. They could sense it, the tone was about to change. Keanu, however, remained unaware. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, speaking about the importance of compassion in storytelling. To me, real heroes aren't the ones who win fights, he said softly. They're the ones who stay kind when life gives them every reason not to. The audience erupted into applause once more, a chorus of claps and cheers that rolled across the studio like a wave. For a brief, glowing moment, everything felt perfect. Then Joy picked up her cue cards and looked straight at him. Her smile hardened. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Her turn had come. The red light above the cameras flickered back on after the brief commercial break. The cheerful theme music faded, and the host smiled for the live audience. On screen, everything looked as bright and effortless as before, but under the surface, something in the room had changed. The first segment had gone too smoothly for Joy Behar's liking. Whoopi began the second segment in her usual warm tone. We're back with Keanu Reeves, whose latest film, The Guardian: Redemption, has been dominating the box office. Keanu, you've always been known for keeping your personal life private, especially in an age when everyone shares everything online. How do you manage that? Keanu gave a small, thoughtful smile. I think privacy's become a lost art. I enjoy my work, but I like having parts of my life that belong only to me. It keeps me balanced. The audience nodded approvingly. A few clapped. Keanu's words came out calm, measured simple truth spoken without defense. But before Whoopi could move on to the next question, Joy's voice cut through like a blade. Let's talk about that privacy, she said suddenly, her tone sharper than before. The laughter in the crowd faltered. Whoopi's eyes shifted toward her, a warning look passing briefly across her face. Joy. Really, Joy continued, ignoring her. There's a difference between being private and being silent when it matters, isn't there? The air seemed to tighten. The words hung there, heavy and unmistakable. Keanu tilted his head slightly, still smiling, though the warmth in his expression cooled just a little. I believe actions speak louder than announcements, he said calmly. What you do when nobody's watching, that's what counts. Joy leaned forward in her chair. But silence can be dangerous, she pressed. You have one of the biggest platforms in the world. Millions of people listen to you. Don't you think it's irresponsible not to use that platform to speak out? The audience fell quiet. The familiar rhythm of daytime television, laughter, clapping, soft transitions, vanished. The cameras stayed locked on Keanu's face. He didn't rush to answer. He took a breath, then spoke evenly. I think everyone contributes in their own way. I choose to support people quietly. It's not about being silent, it's about being sincere. There was a pause. Then someone in the audience began to clap. Another joined in. Within seconds, half the studio was applauding. Whoopi looked visibly relieved. She smiled and nodded. That's a great answer. But Joy wasn't smiling. Her pen lay flat on the table now, her hand resting beside it like she was preparing for another strike. Her eyes narrowed slightly as the applause died down. For the first time that morning, Keanu's steady calm wasn't just politeness, it was armor. Joy Behar waited until the applause faded. Her smile returned, but it was different now, stiff, calculated. That's a nice sentiment, Keanu, she said. But don't you think that's a little convenient? Saying you help quietly sounds noble, but when people with influence stay neutral, isn't that just a way to avoid controversy? The audience murmured, caught off guard. The warmth from earlier drained out of the room. Even the cameramen seemed to hesitate, unsure where to focus. Keanu didn't flinch. "I don't see compassion as controversial," he said softly. "I see it as human." Joy chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Human, sure, but we live in a world where silence isn't neutral. When you don't speak out against something wrong, you take a side by default." Whoopi's pen dropped against the table. "Joy," she warned gently, "let's not." Joy waved her off. "No, Whoopi, this is important. We have young viewers watching. They need to know that silence allows injustice to thrive. If someone with Keanu's reach refuses to speak out, what message does that send?" Sunny looked down at her tablet, her fingers frozen mid-scroll. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Keanu, clearly hoping he'd somehow diffuse the moment. Keanu took a breath, keeping his composure. "With respect, I don't believe silence and thoughtfulness are the same thing," he said. "I listen before I speak, because I want my words to mean something." "That's not avoidance, it's responsibility." There was an audible sigh of relief from a few people in the audience. A small round of applause began again, tentative at first, but growing stronger. Keanu's answers struck the same chord of integrity that had won over millions. But Joy wasn't satisfied. She leaned forward again, voice tightening. "So, responsibility means what, writing checks? Staying out of the hard conversations? You've built this image as the humble good guy. But when it comes to the big issues, where are you?" The last word landed like a challenge. Keanu's expression changed slightly. The gentle smile softened into something quieter, more measured, more serious. "I'm where I've always been," he said. "Helping where I can, doing what feels right, and treating people with decency. I don't need a camera to prove that." The crowd broke into applause again, louder this time. The sound filled the studio and seemed to wash over the tension. But Joy didn't join in. Her jaw tightened. Sarah gave a nervous laugh, trying to redirect the tone. "Well, I think the world could use a little more of that decency." Whoopi nodded quickly, picking up on the attempt to recover. "Yes, absolutely. I think that's what's missing these days." But Joy wasn't backing down. She had come armed with something, and it was clear she wasn't finished. Her voice cut through again, low and sharp. "You call it decency. I call it playing it safe." The studio fell silent again. Keanu's calm didn't break, but behind his eyes, something flickered, something quietly resolute. The silence that followed stretched long enough for the tension to become palpable. Even through the bright stage lights, the air felt heavy, charged. Keanu didn't rush to fill it. He simply looked at Joy, not in anger, but with a steady patience that made her next words sound even harsher. "Playing it safe," she repeated, louder now, "is what too many people in this business do. They hide behind good deeds and quiet gestures instead of taking real stands. It's easy to be likable when you never risk being disliked." Whoopi shifted in her chair. "Joy, come on now." But Joy kept going. "Don't you think the world would be a better place if more people with your kind of influence spoke out on things that matter? You have millions of fans who hang on every word you say, and you give them silence. Isn't that a waste?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Confusion, discomfort, disbelief. The warmth that had filled the room minutes earlier had turned cold. Keanu's posture changed slightly. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his voice still calm but firmer. "I don't think I owe my values to social approval," he said. "What I believe doesn't live in sound bites or hashtags. It lives in the way I treat people, every single day. That's not silence, that's life." A small but powerful wave of applause broke from the audience, defying the awkward energy on stage. Some viewers clapped harder, sensing the meaning behind his tone. He wasn't sparring, he was standing. Joy's jaw tightened further. She tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. That sounds poetic, but it's a little easy, don't you think? Real change takes more than just being nice to people. Keanu's eyes didn't leave hers. His voice lowered, but it carried across the entire room. Real change starts with being decent to people. Because if you can't manage that, everything else is just noise. The studio erupted in applause again, louder, more decisive. People began cheering. Whoopi's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't seen that coming. Sarah smiled, a look of relief spreading across her face. Even Alyssa clapped, glancing nervously toward Joy. Joy leaned back in her chair, her expression tight. She'd underestimated him. She'd expected evasion, maybe discomfort. Not this unwavering calm that turned her aggression into something small and petty by comparison. Keanu gave her a polite nod, not gloating, not angry, just composed. "I understand that you see it differently," he said. "That's okay. We can disagree without making enemies of each other." That line landed harder than anything before. It was quiet, simple, but it cut straight through the noise. Whoopi seized the moment, her voice breaking through with forced cheer. "Well, that's what we need more of, respectful disagreement." "Let's take a short break, folks." The applause rose again as the red light above the cameras dimmed. But beneath the clapping, there was no mistaking the shift. The warmth that had once belonged to Joy had quietly moved to Keanu. The audience's hearts had already chosen their side. The cameras came back from the commercial break to a studio that looked calm, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. The hosts smiled for the audience, but those smiles felt forced. Joy Behar sat upright, shoulders tight, eyes sharp. She wasn't ready to let this go. If anything, Keanu's composure had made her more determined to break him. Before the break, Joy began. "We were talking about influence and responsibility, and I just have to say I find it interesting when people in positions of power and privilege claim humility as an excuse for inaction." Keanu's expression didn't change, but the faintest crease appeared between his brows. "Excuse me?" he asked, his tone calm but clipped. Joy leaned forward, her elbows on the round table. "You have an enormous platform," she said. "Millions of people look up to you. You've made more money than most people will ever see in their lifetime. You could make real change by taking a stand on the big issues, but instead, you hide behind comfort. You talk about kindness and compassion like it's enough. It's not. That's just privilege, disguised as humility." A hush fell across the studio. Even the audience didn't seem to know whether to breathe. Keanu took a moment before responding. He uncrossed his legs, leaned forward slightly, and spoke in a low voice that carried more power than a shout ever could. "You want to talk about privilege?" he said quietly. "Let's define it." Joy's confident expression faltered, but only slightly. "Privilege," Keanu continued, "is sitting in a studio in the middle of Manhattan, surrounded by lights and cameras, talking about the world's problems from a safe distance. It's getting paid to criticize people who are out there actually trying to help." There were murmurs from the audience. A few claps, then more. Joy looked unsettled for the first time that morning. Sunny Hostin stepped in, sensing her colleague losing ground. "Keanu, I think what Joy is trying to say is that staying silent on injustice allows it to spread. People respect you. They listen to you. Don't you think you have a duty to use that power?" Keanu turned toward her, his voice steady. "I think we all have a duty to help others, but that doesn't mean shouting our virtue from rooftops. Real change happens quietly. Through persistence. Through respect. Through giving your time and effort. Not through outrage." Sunny frowned slightly. "But silence can be mistaken for consent. Not when your actions speak for you," Keanu said. "If I spend my time helping people in need, and someone still calls that silence, maybe they're the ones who've forgotten what action really looks like." The proplement. Applause came again, this time louder, longer. Sarah hid a smile behind her hand. Whoopi glanced toward Joy, her face saying what her mouth didn't. "This isn't going well." Joy's jaw tightened as the applause rolled through the studio. The audience's reaction stung. She was used to controlling the rhythm of the show, guiding it toward her message, but now it felt like the energy was slipping from her grasp and landing squarely in Keanu's calm hands. When the clapping faded, she leaned in again, her tone sharper. "You make it sound so simple. Just be kind. Just do quiet good deeds, and everything will magically fix itself." That's not how progress happens. Progress requires confrontation. It requires taking a side. Keanu's eyes didn't waver. "And taking a side doesn't always mean taking the loudest one," he said. "Sometimes the strongest stand you can take is refusing to join a fight that divides people." Sunny joined in again, sensing an opportunity to shift the balance back toward her co-host. "But Keanu, isn't silence exactly what allows division to grow? When influential people don't speak out, the wrong voices fill that void. Don't you think that gives power to the very forces you say you oppose?" Keanu paused for a beat, his gaze moving from Sunny to Joy and back again. "I think that assumes people can't think for themselves," he said evenly. "The world doesn't need more celebrities telling them what to believe. It needs more people willing to listen to understand before they condemn. You can't fix a broken world by shouting over it." The words hit hard. There was a low hum of approval from the audience. Some nodded. Others clapped softly. The balance of power on that stage shifted even more. Alyssa tried to interject, her tone lighter, almost pleading. "I think maybe what Keanu's saying is that compassion can look different for different people." Joy cut her off sharply. "No, I think he's saying it's easier to stay comfortable when the world burns around you." "That was too far," the audience gasped. Even Sunny looked uncomfortable now. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Comfort," he repeated slowly. "Do you think it's comfortable to see pain and feel it deeply enough to want to change it? To visit hospitals and see kids fighting diseases they don't deserve? To meet parents working 3 jobs and still struggling to keep their homes? That's not comfort. That's reality." The crowd began to clap again, louder this time, breaking into full applause. Keanu let it settle before continuing. "The people who watch your show every morning, they're not waiting for another argument. They're trying to live, to do their best, to hold their families together. I choose to honor that struggle with respect, not by pretending to lecture them from a pedestal." For the first time, Joy didn't respond immediately. Her eyes darted toward the camera, then back to Keanu, as if calculating how to recover. But the energy had already shifted. Joy finally found her voice again, though it trembled with frustration more than confidence. "So, you think just being a decent guy is enough? You think that excuses you from taking a real position on the issues that matter? That's not courage, Keanu. That's cowardice, dressed up as humility." A hush swept through the audience. Even the camera operators froze. It wasn't just bold, it was cruel. Keanu's jaw tightened, but his tone remained steady. "Cowardice?" he repeated softly. "I've spent 30 years standing in front of cameras, facing judgment from millions of strangers. I've buried people I love. I've faced rejection, poverty, loss, and I'm still here, still trying to do what's right. That's not cowardice, Joy. That's surviving with integrity." The audience broke into applause again, this time erupting with force. Some stood, clapping as if they were at a movie premiere. But the emotion wasn't entertainment, it was respect. Joy waited for the noise to die down. Her face flushed, but she pushed forward. "You keep bringing up personal pain like it's a shield. We're not talking about your past. We're talking about using your platform today to fight for what's right." Keanu leaned slightly forward, his voice lower, sharper. "I don't use my pain as a shield," he said. "I use it as perspective. Maybe the difference between us is that I've learned you can't shout people into compassion. You can only live it." Sunny jumped in quickly, her tone half defensive, half pleading. "But Keanu, don't you think influence carries responsibility? If not you, then who?" Keanu turned toward her, meeting her eyes with quiet composure. Everyone has influence, he said. The teacher in a public school, the nurse working overnight, the father teaching his son not to hate. Influence isn't about microphones, it's about moments. Every one of us has a chance to do good. I just happened to do mine without cameras. That line landed like thunder. The applause returned louder, longer, unstoppable. Whoopi looked down at her notes, trying to appear calm, but clearly shaken. Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with admiration. Alyssa looked torn between pride and disbelief. Joy sat back, lips pressed together, realizing she was losing control not just of the conversation, but of the audience. Her expression hardened. So what you're saying is, you think you're better than everyone who does speak out? Keanu shook his head slowly. No, he said, his tone final. I'm saying I don't think anyone's better than anyone else. We just have different ways of showing what we care about. That single sentence silenced the room completely. It wasn't a defense, it was truth, spoken with unshakable grace. And in that silence, Joy Behar understood something she hadn't expected. She wasn't arguing with a movie star. She was standing in the shadow of a man whose quiet conviction had already won. The tension in the studio had reached its breaking point. The applause from Keanu's last words still echoed faintly when Joy leaned forward again, determined not to lose control of the segment. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced a smile. You talk about kindness like it's enough, Keanu, she said. But this isn't about being nice, it's about taking a stand. You sit there, calm and collected, while the world burns, and you expect us to applaud your silence? The audience murmured uneasily. Even Sunny shifted in her seat, glancing between them like someone watching a train speeding toward a wall. Keanu's jaw flexed slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. No, he said slowly. I don't expect applause for anything, but I also don't confuse outrage with bravery. Joy frowned. Meaning what? Meaning, Keanu continued, leaning forward slightly. You speak truth to power from million-dollar studios. That's not courage. That's performance. The words hit like a thunderclap. The air went still, the silence stretching long and sharp. Then came the gasps from the audience, from crew members, even from Alyssa, who covered her mouth in disbelief. Joy's face went pale, then flushed red. Excuse me? She snapped. You think holding people accountable is performance? Keanu's eyes stayed on hers, calm but unyielding. I think pretending to fight for justice while talking over people isn't accountability, he said. It's theater. You tell others what courage should look like while sitting in comfort, safe from consequence. Whoopi's head turned slowly toward him, her eyes wide. The control room camera zoomed in. Every lens, every microphone, every heartbeat in the building seemed focused on him alone. The audience sat frozen. Then someone in the back started clapping. A second joined, then a third. Within seconds, the sound grew a wave of applause, swelling like a rising tide. Joy tried to speak over it, her voice cracking. You think you can just sit there and lecture us? Keanu didn't move. His tone stayed calm. No. I'm just reminding you that not everyone who speaks loudly is brave, and not everyone who stays quiet is afraid. Joy's pen fell from her hand and rolled across the table. The clatter echoed louder than it should have. She bent to pick it up, but her hands shook. Sunny glanced nervously at Whoopi, who looked torn between stepping in and letting the moment play out. Alyssa, sitting at the far end of the table, gave Keanu a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect. The tide in the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Joy straightened slowly, gripping her pen like a lifeline. So that's what this is about? She said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. You think people like me don't care? You think because I sit in a studio I can't possibly understand struggle? Keanu didn't react to the bite in her tone. He kept his hands folded on the table, his voice even and controlled. I think people forget that empathy doesn't need an audience, he said. You can care deeply and still choose not to broadcast it. I just don't believe compassion should come with a spotlight attached." Joy's laugh was sharp and hollow. "That's convenient. You get to look righteous while never having to risk anything." Keanu's eyes softened, but his words landed with precision. "I've risked everything that matters," he said quietly. "You just didn't see it on television." The audience erupted in applause again, louder, this time stronger. It rolled through the studio like thunder. Joy tried to speak over it, but the noise swallowed her voice. Whoopi raised her hand, trying to restore order, but the applause kept building. It wasn't just support, it was release. The crowd had been holding their breath through the tension, and now they were breathing again, fully, freely. When it finally began to fade, Joy leaned back in her chair, her face tight with disbelief. "So that's it, huh? You think you're the only one who understands pain? The only one who's real?" Keanu shook his head gently. "No," he said. "I think everyone in this room understands pain. I just think too many people use it as a weapon instead of a bridge." Sunny leaned in, her expression conflicted. "Are you saying that using your platform to talk about injustice is wrong?" Keanu looked at her. "No," he said firmly. "I'm saying it's wrong to judge others for how they choose to help. Some speak, some act, some heal quietly. Every effort matters. But when you turn doing good into a competition, you lose the meaning of it." That struck something deep. The audience began clapping again, though softer this time, less excitement, more reverence. Sarah folded her hands together, visibly moved. Alyssa gave a faint nod of agreement. Even Whoopi, who had been silent for most of the exchange, seemed to recognize that something powerful was unfolding. Her face was pale now, but her pride wouldn't let go. "You keep talking about humility," she said. "But all I hear is someone trying to sound superior." Keanu exhaled slowly. "Humility isn't thinking less of yourself," he said gently. "It's thinking of yourself less. That's something I try to live by, not explain." A murmur spread through the crowd, soft, approving, emotional. Something had shifted completely. Joy could feel it slipping away, but she didn't yet realize the full extent of what she'd lost. Joy's face hardened, her patience wearing thin. "You keep dodging, Keanu," she said, her voice rising above the murmuring crowd. "You talk in riddles about compassion and humility, but when it comes down to it, you're just refusing to take responsibility. You think doing quiet charity work means you've done it enough? That's moral indifference, not integrity." The room went dead quiet again. Even the audience members who had cheered moments earlier froze. Everyone sensed they were about to witness a breaking point. Keanu's posture didn't shift. He looked at Joy for a long moment, his expression calm but unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, so soft that it made everyone lean in to hear. "I've seen poverty. I've seen suffering. I've sat with people who've lost everything and still managed to smile. I don't need applause to care." The words struck like lightning. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with emotion. Then, suddenly, applause erupted again, spontaneous and powerful. People stood, clapping harder than before, their faces lit with admiration. Joy blinked rapidly, her composure slipping. "You think you can guilt me into silence?" she snapped, her tone sharp but unsteady. Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I just think you've mistaken volume for value. Being loud doesn't make someone right, it just makes them easier to hear." The audience broke into laughter and applause at once, the tension cracking open like a storm breaking apart. Even Whoopi had to cover her mouth to hide a small, knowing smile. Joy turned toward her co-hosts, seeking support, but none met her gaze. Sunny's face was blank, her eyes distant. Sarah kept her head down. Alyssa sat completely still, lips pressed together to stop herself from smiling. Keanu's tone softened again, his words measured, sincere. "Look," he said, "we all want the same thing, a better world. But it doesn't start with blaming each other for not shouting loud enough. It starts with listening, helping where we can, and doing what's right, even when no one's watching. The audience applauded once more. Long, sustained, genuine. Whoopi finally found her voice. "I think that's something we can all agree on," she said, trying to bring the energy back down. "Decency and compassion, two things the world could always use more of." Keanu nodded slightly. "And less performance," he added, "just loud enough for the microphones to catch." The reaction was immediate cheers, whistles, applause that drowned out everything else. Joy leaned back in her chair, defeated but defiant, her pen motionless beside her notes. Keanu didn't gloat or smile. He just looked around the room with quiet gratitude, then folded his hands in his lap, the picture of grace under fire. And as the cameras panned across the applauding crowd, one truth settled over everyone watching. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was the moment the quietest man in the room became the loudest voice in it. The sound of applause filled the studio like a living wave. It wasn't polite or routine anymore. It was real. The kind of applause that came from hearts waking up to something they hadn't expected to feel. The cameras panned across the audience, capturing faces beaming, some emotional, some still stunned. Keanu's quiet words had turned into something bigger than the interview itself. Joy Behar's face was pale under the studio lights. She forced a laugh, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "You're very good at this, Keanu," she said, her tone trembling between sarcasm and defense. "You've turned this into a masterclass in humility. But let's be honest here. You've built a career on your image. You profit from being the quiet, kind movie star. So when you talk about decency, isn't that also a kind of branding?" The crowd's reaction was instant boos and gasps mixed together. Someone shouted, "That's not fair!" Another yelled, "Let him speak!" Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hand or his voice. He simply took a slow breath and said, "You think kindness is a brand? Then maybe we've all forgotten what being human actually means." The applause came again, stronger this time, almost defiant. Joy's expression tightened. "You make millions of dollars from that image," she snapped, cutting through the cheers. "You talk about humility, but you live in luxury while preaching simplicity. Maybe you should admit that you care more about the box office than about justice." That accusation hung in the air like smoke. The crowd went silent. Even the camera crew froze. Keanu sat still for a moment, his fingers interlaced in front of him. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then he looked up, his gaze steady, his voice low. "You think money cancels out empathy?" he asked. "You think success means someone stops caring? My success lets me give back, not walk away. Every dollar I've earned has built hospitals, scholarships, and shelters. I don't post about it. I don't film it, because doing good shouldn't be a commercial." The audience exploded in applause again, louder than ever. Some people stood to clap. Others just shouted his name. Joy tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of hundreds of people cheering. She looked around, realizing that for the first time in years, the show wasn't hers anymore. Keanu remained seated, his calm a striking contrast to the chaos around him. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. His eyes were focused, serious, grounded, unwavering. When the applause finally began to fade, Joy leaned forward, her voice brittle. "So you're saying you're better than everyone who disagrees with you?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I'm saying I don't measure people by how loudly they agree with me. I measure them by how they treat others when no one's watching." The words hit deep. The applause came again, but softer, this time respectful, emotional. Joy's pen trembled in her hand. She glanced toward Whoopi for backup, but Whoopi looked away, unwilling to interrupt what everyone knew had become something much larger than television. Joy inhaled sharply, gripping her cue cards as if they could anchor her. Her voice came out strained. "You talk about treating people right, Keanu, but when you refuse to take a public stand, you let the wrong ones win. That's not dignity. That's moral passivity," the audience murmured, unsettled again. Joy's words were harsh, but it was clear she was losing her rhythm. Every line she threw out landed weaker than before. Keanu tilted his head slightly, calm as ever. "I've stood for what's right my whole life," he said softly. "Just not in the way that gets applause. I've seen poverty. I've seen people fighting to survive. I've seen families holding each other together when the world around them was falling apart. I don't need to tweet about that to care." The applause that followed shook the floor. Joy flinched as the sound filled the room. The energy had flipped completely. She tried again, desperate now. "You keep saying you've seen suffering, but you're still part of the system that benefits from it. You're part of Hollywood, an industry that profits off the very inequality you claim to despise." Keanu finally stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, and for a moment the entire studio froze. Every eye, every lens, every spotlight locked onto him. His height, his stillness, the quiet control in his presence, it all drew the room into silence. When he spoke, his voice carried through the hush like thunder wrapped in velvet. "I'm not scared," he said. "I'm disappointed." No one moved. The air itself seemed to hold still. Joy's face went blank. "Disappointed in what?" she asked, her voice smaller now, her confidence slipping through her fingers. Keanu looked around the studio, the audience, the hosts, the cameras pointed at him. "I'm disappointed that we've turned caring into competition," he said. "That we attack anyone who doesn't perform the way we think they should. That we've confused moral theater for actual morality." Applause erupted once more, but this time it wasn't frenzied. It was powerful, unified, sustained. The audience was no longer watching a talk show. They were witnessing a moment. Joy's face fell. The co-hosts glanced at one another, unsure what to say. Even Whoopi, the veteran moderator, seemed speechless. Sarah's eyes glistened. Alyssa nodded slowly, almost proudly. Keanu took another breath, his words deliberate and unwavering. "You can scream about justice all you want," he said, "but if you can't treat the person across from you with respect, you've already lost the meaning of it." That line sealed it. The audience rose to their feet, applause echoing like thunder. It rolled on, drowning out the tension, drowning out Joy's shallow breaths. Keanu gave a small nod, humble and sincere. He didn't wave, he didn't bow. He simply stood there, letting the moment belong to everyone else. When the applause finally began to quiet, he added one last line, his voice carrying to the back of the studio. "I don't want followers. I want people to think for themselves again." The crowd roared once more. Joy sat frozen, silent, unable to respond. Keanu remained standing, composed, unshaken. The storm around him, no longer something to endure, but something he had transformed. The applause was still rolling through the studio when Keanu stepped back from the table. His calm didn't break, it deepened. He reached up and began unclipping the small microphone from his collar with the same quiet precision he brought to every action. The studio lights gleamed off the silver clasp as it clicked free. The sound echoed faintly in the silence that followed. The movement was small, but it sent shockwaves through the room. Whoopi's pen froze in midair. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Alyssa straightened in her chair, realizing what was about to happen. Sunny blinked rapidly, her eyes darting to Joy, who sat frozen in her seat. Joy's voice cracked the stillness. "What are you doing?" Keanu looked at her with the same gentle patience he had carried from the start. "Ending a conversation that stopped being one," he said softly. Joy blinked, thrown by the calmness in his tone. "So you're walking out? Just like that? You can't handle a few tough questions?" Keanu's reply came steady and low. "There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks. I came here to talk, not to fight." The audience stayed silent, sensing they were witnessing something that wasn't scripted, something raw and real. He turned to the other hosts. "You've all forgotten what conversations are supposed to be for," he said, his words deliberate, each one cutting through the air with clarity. We're supposed to understand each other, not humiliate, not score points, not turn every disagreement into a performance." Whoopi looked down at her notes, her jaw tight. She didn't disagree. Keanu set the microphone gently on the table. The small gesture felt monumental. "You talk about courage," he said, his gaze moving from Joy to Sunny. "But real courage isn't shouting down people who think differently. It's listening when it's uncomfortable. It's trying to understand, even when it's easier to condemn." The studio audience began to applaud, again slow at first, like hesitant rain tapping on glass, then stronger, louder, building into a wave of sound that filled every corner of the room. Joy shook her head, her face pale. "You're twisting this into some kind of speech," she said, her voice trembling. "You're turning yourself into the victim." Keanu looked at her with quiet steadiness. "I'm not a victim," he said, "just disappointed." He took a slow step back, his hands clasped in front of him. "The problem isn't that we disagree, it's that we've forgotten how to do it with respect. Disagreement doesn't require humiliation. Debate doesn't have to destroy dignity." The audience clapped louder. Some people rose from their seats. Others wiped their eyes. Even the camera operators stood frozen, unable to look away. Keanu turned toward the nearest camera, his expression kind but resolute. The light above the lens glowed red. He looked directly into it, as if speaking to the millions watching at home. "People watching right now," Keanu said into the camera, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You don't need celebrities to tell you how to think. You don't need someone on TV to approve of your values. You're already doing your best. You work hard. You raise families. You take care of people. And that matters." The words resonated through the studio like a sermon, steady and sincere. The audience began to stir, then stand. Rows of people rose to their feet, their applause swelling again. Not the polite clapping of an audience, but the roar of people who had finally heard someone say what they'd been feeling all along. Keanu waited for the noise to settle just enough before continuing. "You've all been told that if you're not loud, you don't care, that if you don't post, you don't contribute. But I promise you, doing good quietly is still doing good. You don't need applause for decency." Joy sat motionless. Her hands trembled on the table. Her face was unreadable anger mixed with disbelief. But behind it, something like shame flickered for the first time. Whoopi leaned forward slightly, her eyes soft. "Keanu," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "I think people needed to hear that." He gave her a small nod. "Then I've said what I came to say." The audience's applause grew again, echoing off the studio walls. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others shouted his name. Every camera had locked onto him now, following his every move as he stepped away from the table. Joy finally found her voice. "You're just walking away? That's it?" Keanu paused mid-step, then turned back toward her. "You called this courage," he said, gesturing toward the lights, the cameras, the controlled outrage. "But courage doesn't need an audience. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't divide. It builds bridges where people have burned them." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and draped it over his arm. Then he gave one last look toward the hosts. "I hope someday we can have real conversations again," he said. "Not performances." The crowd erupted. It was no longer applause, it was a standing ovation that shook the room. Every single person was on their feet. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. Alyssa clapped hard, her smile small but sincere. Even Sunny, though she stayed seated, seemed visibly shaken. Joy didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the table in front of her, the weight of the moment pressing down like gravity. Keanu turned toward the exit, walking with the same quiet grace that had defined him throughout the confrontation. The cameras followed his every step, the red lights still glowing. As he reached the edge of the stage, he paused one last time and looked back at the crowd that was still on its feet. "Be kind to each other," he said softly. "That's where change begins." And with that, he walked off set. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, stronger, filling the studio like thunder rolling through the heart of something awakening. By the next morning, the internet was on fire. The clip of Keanu removing his microphone, staring calmly into the camera, and walking off set had been shared across every platform imaginable. On TikTok, it was cut into dramatic edits with swelling music. On Twitter, the phrase, "I'm not scared, I'm disappointed," was quoted thousands of times within hours. By sunrise, number "Stand with Keanu" and number "Respect Reeves" were trending worldwide. People couldn't stop replaying the moment. In one video, his final words, "Be kind to each other." "That's where change begins," played over slow-motion footage of him leaving the stage. In another, fans compared his composure to famous historical speeches, writing that it was the quietest revolution ever broadcast. Millions watched the confrontation unfold frame by frame. The comment sections filled with emotion. Some viewers admitted they'd never cried over a talk show before. Others wrote that it reminded them of what decency used to look like. Within hours, celebrities began posting messages of support. Actors, directors, and musicians flooded social media with personal stories. "Worked with Keanu 5 years ago," one producer tweeted. "He thanked every crew member individually by name. That's who he is. Always has been." An Oscar-winning director reposted the clip, writing, "This is why I'll always cast him. Not for box office, because he's real." Even people outside the entertainment industry joined in. A nurse from Chicago shared, "Keanu visited our hospital 3 times last year. No cameras, no press. He spent hours talking to the kids. One of them told him she wanted to grow up brave like him. I guess she already did." A high school teacher from Texas wrote, "When he told viewers, 'You don't need celebrities to tell you how to think,' I felt that. My students need that reminder every day that they're enough, that their voice matters." The posts multiplied faster than any PR team could track. Everywhere people looked, there was Keanu's face, not from a movie poster, but from a still frame of that live broadcast. Calm, resolute, unshaken. Meanwhile, the clip from The View's official YouTube channel shattered records. Within 6 hours, it had over 30 million views. Comments poured in faster than moderators could approve them. "The most dignified moment in TV history," one read. Another simply said, "He didn't walk out. He walked above it." Joy Behar's name trended too, but not in the way she hoped. Viewers dissected every glare, every interruption, every dismissive smirk from the broadcast. Commentators accused her of trying to corner a man who'd done nothing but speak gently. Political pundits debated whether the show had gone too far. Even news outlets usually aligned with Joy's perspective admitted the segment had backfired spectacularly. By that afternoon, the Views Network released a brief statement praising spirited debate and meaningful discourse, but no one was buying it. The internet had already chosen sides, and this time, the court of public opinion had ruled overwhelmingly in favor of decency. By the end of the day, the story had gone beyond entertainment. It became a cultural moment. Major news outlets replayed the segment on loop, analyzing every second of it. Commentators called it the day kindness won. Others said it marked a shift in how the world views celebrity virtue. Clips of Keanu's calm responses were played side by side with Joy Behar's rising frustration, a visual lesson in composure under fire. Even journalists who rarely agreed on anything found common ground. A conservative columnist tweeted, "Reeves showed grace under pressure." A progressive commentator replied, "He reminded us that true activism starts with empathy, not arrogance." For a brief moment, the internet wasn't divided. It was united by admiration for one man's quiet dignity. Celebrities continued to share their own encounters. Sandra Bullock wrote on Instagram, "Keanu once spent an entire wrap party washing dishes because he didn't want the crew to stay late. That's who he is. That's who you saw." Lawrence Fishburne commented simply, "Always solid, always true." Fan tributes poured in by the thousands. Artists painted portraits of the moment he removed his microphone. Musicians wrote songs using his words as lyrics. A filmmaker in London edited together a short film titled "The Man Who Didn't Need to Shout," and it gained 2 million views overnight. While Keanu's reputation soared, Joy Behar's began to crumble. The backlash was relentless. Hashtags like #Behar backfire and #Humility wins trended beside #Stand with Keanu. Her old clips resurfaced other interviews where she'd interrupted guests or mocked differing opinions. The pattern was undeniable. Commenters flooded The View's social media pages, demanding accountability. Under mounting pressure, Joy finally issued a statement the next morning. It was carefully worded, clearly crafted by a publicist. "I have great respect for Keanu Reeves and regret if my tone came across as harsh. My intention was to engage in a meaningful dialogue about responsibility and influence. But the apology landed with a thud." Viewers saw it for what it was, a hollow attempt to save face. Comments poured in beneath her post, rejecting the insincerity. "You didn't want dialogue," one wrote. "You wanted to humiliate him," another added. "It's too late." The world saw the difference between ego and empathy. In contrast, Keanu said nothing. No statement, no post, no interview. The silence only made him more respected. His restraint was proof of everything he'd said. Real goodness doesn't perform, it acts quietly. 2 days later, photos surfaced of him outside a children's cancer center in Los Angeles. He was smiling with a little boy who wore a baseball cap and held a signed action figure. There were no reporters, no microphones, just someone who happened to recognize him. The image went viral instantly. The caption beneath it read, "The man who walked away from the noise walked straight into kindness." That single photo said what millions of words couldn't. By the weekend, The View's ratings had plummeted. Sponsors pulled out, citing viewer trust concerns. But Keanu's image, his words, and his walkout had already transcended television. They'd become a message, a reminder that humility can still silence arrogance, and that grace under fire will always outshine cruelty. He was believed. The morning after the broadcast, chaos erupted inside ABC headquarters. What had started as a typical Tuesday talk show had spiraled into the most controversial live segment in the network's history. Executives poured into the glass-walled conference room on the 15th floor, clutching tablets, phones, and coffee cups that went cold within minutes. The mood was grim. One of the senior producers slammed a folder down on the table. "We've lost 3 major advertisers overnight," he said. "They're pulling spots from next week's schedule, and that's just the beginning." Another producer scrolled through social media metrics. "The clip has been viewed more than 100 million times," she said. "Half the comments are celebrating Keanu. The other half are demanding Joy's removal." Our inbox is flooded. At the end of the table, the network's vice president of programming rubbed his temples. "We can't afford this kind of backlash, not during sweep season." Downstairs, the production team for The View sat in stunned silence. Some of them avoided eye contact entirely, still reeling from what had happened live on air. Others whispered about how quickly the audience had turned. No one had ever seen anything like it. Joy Behar arrived through a side entrance, sunglasses covering her eyes, her usual confidence replaced by quiet tension. She barely greeted anyone before retreating to her dressing room. Behind closed doors, she stared at her reflection, scrolling through the headlines. Behar humiliated on live TV. View host crosses the line. Keanu teaches a masterclass in grace. Each one stung deeper than the last. Upstairs, Whoopi Goldberg was meeting privately with producers. She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "We can't keep doing this," she said. "The audience is tired of anger disguised as conversation. Either this show changes or it's over." One of the senior producers sighed. "The network wants you to address it on air tomorrow. They're expecting an apology, something that resets the tone." "Not a chance," Whoopi said. "I'm not apologizing for Joy." She made her bed. Sarah Haynes knocked gently on the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly. "Just wanted to say thank you for keeping it together yesterday." Whoopi gave her a faint smile. "You did fine, kid. We all did our best. But the truth is, that man handled it better than any of us." Sarah nodded. "He didn't get angry once. That's what makes it hurt even more. For Joy, he didn't fight her. He just exposed her." Meanwhile, Alyssa Farah Griffin sat in the parking lot, unable to start her car. Her phone buzzed non-stop with texts and emails. She opened one message from an old friend. That moment with Keanu gave me hope again. Maybe people still value decency. Alyssa smiled faintly, her eyes wet. She typed a short reply. So do I. By noon, the crisis had reached the top floors of ABC headquarters. The president of daytime programming called an emergency meeting with legal, PR, and advertising. Screens around the room flashed analytics, graphs, and red warning symbols showing plummeting advertiser confidence. One executive spoke bluntly. We're down 15% in ad revenue projections for the quarter. Sponsors don't want their brands associated with that level of hostility. The PR director added, we're fielding thousands of angry emails from viewers. Half say they're boycotting the show. The other half are asking why we haven't apologized to Keanu Reeves personally. The president sat back, his tone clipped. And has anyone reached out to his team? A junior staffer swallowed hard. His rep said he's unavailable for comment. No interviews, no statements. Just silence. That silence was louder than any response. It wasn't defiance, it was dignity. And it made the network's panic look even more desperate. By mid-afternoon, Joy Behar was summoned upstairs. The hallway outside the conference room was lined with whispering assistants. She walked past them, head high, but her steps were uneven. Inside, executives laid out the damage, advertisers gone, viewership backlash, and a wave of public sympathy for Keanu that dwarfed anything the show had ever seen. Joy tried to push back. I was doing my job, asking questions no one else had the guts to ask. The network's attorney interrupted coldly. You weren't asking questions. You were provoking. And now we're paying for it. Joy folded her arms, defiant. So what do you want from me? To beg for forgiveness? The VP of programming replied quietly, we want accountability. Meanwhile, downstairs in the production office, Whoopi was already rewriting the next day's script. We're dropping the political segment, she told her producer. We're opening with gratitude, something simple, human. Sarah looked up from her laptop. Do you really think the network will let you do that? Whoopi smiled faintly. They can't stop me from trying. Later that afternoon, Sarah and Alyssa texted Keanu's assistant privately. Alyssa wrote, please tell him his words meant something. He reminded us what grace looks like. The reply came an hour later. He says, thank you. He's just glad people are listening again. That same evening, while the media continued its frenzy, Keanu was far from the noise. At a children's cancer ward in Los Angeles, he sat cross-legged on the floor beside a young boy named Thomas, reading aloud from a worn copy of The Little Prince. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them. The boy listened, smiling weakly, his IV pole standing beside the chair. When Keanu finished the chapter, Thomas whispered, why did the prince have to leave his planet? Keanu thought for a moment before replying gently, sometimes we leave to learn how much love really means, but we always carry it with us. The boy nodded, gripping his hand. You sound like him. Keanu smiled. Maybe we all do. A little. Across the room, a nurse wiped her eyes. There were no cameras, no press, no fans asking for selfies, just quiet voices, laughter, and warmth. While executives scrambled and headlines spun, Keanu had already moved on, living the same values he spoke about on that stage. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was peace. That night, an intern scrolling through social media noticed a single photo uploaded anonymously from the hospital. It showed Keanu kneeling beside the boy, holding the open book between them. The caption said, while the world argues, he's still choosing kindness. The post spread quietly, one share at a time. And in that stillness, the noise of outrage finally began to fade, replaced by something far more lasting respect. In the days that followed, the story evolved from a viral sensation into something deeper. It stopped being about television ratings or celebrity gossip and turned into a kind of cultural mirror. Talk shows, news networks, and podcasts began discussing the moment as if it were a national turning point, a sign that people were ready for something different. Commentators called it a moral reset. One anchor on a morning show said, "It's not about Keanu Reeves versus Joy Behar. It's about the difference between authenticity and performance." Another analyst added, "For years, public debate has rewarded outrage over empathy. What we saw was the opposite, a man who refused to play the game." Clips of Keanu's calm responses were played beside aggressive political debates, showing the contrast in tone. Viewers noticed how peace could silence chaos more effectively than shouting ever could. People were tired of being told what to believe, tired of anger being marketed as virtue. In Keanu's quiet defiance, they found something rare: hope that decency still had a place in public life. At coffee shops, in classrooms, and around dinner tables, people talked about it. Teachers showed the clip to their students, asking them what they thought courage looked like. Soldiers overseas shared it in group chats, saying, "That's what strength really means." Parents quoted his words to their children, "You don't need applause for decency." On construction sites and in small-town diners, people who rarely agreed on anything found common ground. One truck driver in Ohio told a reporter, "I don't care what side you're on, right is right." That man showed respect even when they didn't give him any. Workers, nurses, veterans, and ordinary Americans began sharing their own stories of quiet goodness, the kind that never made headlines. A retired firefighter wrote on Facebook, "For once, a celebrity didn't try to turn controversy into a career move. He just walked away stronger." Social media filled with posts under the hashtag #DoGoodQuietly. Photos of everyday kindness appeared: a man paying for a stranger's meal, a teenager helping an elderly neighbor, a group of volunteers cleaning a park without cameras. Each post was tagged with the same quote, "You don't need applause for decency." Keanu's silence became symbolic. The less he spoke, the more his message grew. While other stars rushed to comment, clarify, or capitalize, he did nothing, and yet his influence kept spreading. Late-night hosts tried to make jokes about the walkout, but even the punchlines fell flat. The audience didn't laugh. They nodded. They understood something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, it felt like the public wasn't craving spectacle, they were craving sincerity. Across America, the debate turned inward. People began asking themselves whether they, too, had mistaken noise for meaning. Churches mentioned Keanu's moment in sermons. Community leaders quoted his words during meetings. One small-town mayor crowned. Kentucky even opened a city council session with them, saying, "If Hollywood can be reminded of humility, so can we." The movement wasn't about fandom anymore. It was about rediscovering grace. A week later, national newspapers began calling it the Keanu effect. Editorials described it as a collective sigh of relief in a culture addicted to outrage. One columnist wrote, "For a decade, we've celebrated confrontation as courage. Then, Keanu Reeves reminded us that true strength speaks softly." The phrase, "You don't need applause for decency," was now printed on shirts, mugs, and protest signs. It appeared on classroom whiteboards and office bulletin boards across the country. But it wasn't being sold as merchandise. It was spreading like a moral whisper, carried by people who wanted the world to slow down and remember what mattered. Universities hosted open discussions about the moment. Philosophy professors dissected his response as an example of stoic virtue in the modern age. A small college in Vermont even created a course called Humility in the Spotlight, the ethics of integrity, using the interview as a case study. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed out of it completely. There were no press tours, no interviews, no attempts to frame the event as activism. When reporters finally caught up with him outside a film set in Vancouver, he smiled politely and said, "I think we all just want to be better to each other. That's all." Then he waved, thanked them, and walked away. That small clip went viral again, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. People were stunned by his ability to stay humble, while the world treated him like a moral icon. Commenters wrote, "He didn't seize the moment. The moment belonged to him because he let it go." Ordinary Americans continued to carry his message forward. A single mother in Kansas posted a video saying, "I used to think no one saw what I did, working 2 jobs, helping my kids with homework, staying kind even when life got hard." But when he said, "You're doing your best, and that matters," I felt seen. A veteran from Florida posted a letter on Facebook that read, "He reminded us that silence isn't weakness, it's discipline. The strongest men I knew in combat never yelled. They just did their duty." Across the country, people found new pride in humility. The loudest voices no longer seemed as powerful. The calm ones began to lead again. Even television executives started to take notice. Other talk shows toned down their confrontations, pivoting toward empathy-driven segments. Some networks began booking guests who focused on solutions rather than arguments. A shift was beginning, not huge, but real. And for once, it wasn't about Keanu's fame. It was about his example. When asked by a journalist what he thought of all the attention, a close friend of Keanu's answered simply, "He doesn't think it's about him. He thinks people just needed a reminder that kindness still works." In that quiet truth lay the heart of it all. A single moment of composure had sparked something vast, a reawakening of conscience in a weary world. For millions who had grown tired of anger, the message landed like fresh air. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to win to be right. You don't have to be famous to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is walking away with grace. Weeks passed, and what had once been a viral moment began settling into history, but its echo refused to fade. Journalists returned to Keanu's words, analyzing every phrase, every pause, every look that had silenced an audience and reshaped a conversation about what moral strength really meant. One op-ed in The Atlantic called it, "The day moral theater collapsed." The writer described the interview as a cultural exorcism, television's reckoning with its own obsession for outrage. It wasn't Keanu's calm that broke Joy Behar, the article read. It was his refusal to play the game. He walked through provocation with grace, and that grace revealed the emptiness of performance. Other publications followed. The New York Times printed a column titled, "Humility in the Age of Noise." It said, "For years, decency was dismissed as weakness. Now, because of one man's composure, the conversation is shifting. The question is no longer who shouted loudest, it's who listened best." Cable news networks ran retrospective segments. Analysts debated whether Keanu's silence was strategy or instinct. Some called it brilliance, others called it sincerity. Either way, they agreed his restraint changed the tone of modern discourse. At media schools across the country, the clip became a case study. In one lecture at NYU, a professor paused the moment where Keanu calmly removed his microphone and asked her class, "What did he just do here?" A student raised her hand. "He took back control without saying a word," she said. "He made silence powerful again." Students leaned forward, watching how the scene unfolded. Another student added, "It's not about winning the argument, it's about walking away with your dignity intact." The classroom buzzed with quiet thought. Future journalists were no longer discussing who was right or wrong. They were discussing the ethics of televised confrontation. They questioned whether shows like The View had lost their way, whether activism had become entertainment, whether integrity could survive the demand for outrage. Clips of the interview began circulating again, this time not as viral drama, but as academic material. Media professors titled lessons, "The Moment, the Mic, Dropped Without Noise." It was analyzed frame by frame, used to illustrate how calm truth could disarm chaos. At one university in California, a guest speaker, a former journalist, stood before a hall of students and said, "This moment will be remembered not because he fought back, but because he didn't. We've been trained to think silence is weakness. He turned it into strength." Everywhere, people began quoting the line that had defined it all, "You don't need applause for decency." Meanwhile, Joy Behar kept out of sight. Her absence from The View extended into weeks. When she finally returned, her demeanor was different, subdued, almost distant. The laughter was smaller, the spark was gone. Audiences noticed, and so did critics. They said she looked like someone who had been publicly humbled and privately haunted by her own words. ABC issued no further statements. The scandal had burned itself out, but its ashes still smoldered beneath every conversation about journalistic ethics and celebrity conduct. And through it all, Keanu said nothing. Reporters continued to reach out to Keanu's team, hoping for an exclusive statement. Every major outlet from Good Morning America to BBC Newsnight sent polite requests for follow-up interviews, panel discussions, or even short quotes. His publicist gave the same answer every time. Mr. Reeves appreciates the interest but will not be commenting further. The silence became its own message. In a media world addicted to reaction, his refusal to participate turned into an act of resistance. Commentators began calling it the Reeves Doctrine, the belief that silence, when anchored in truth, can outlast any headline. Podcasts and talk panels, scholars debated his choice. By staying quiet, one sociologist said, he exposed how much we depend on constant commentary to fill moral voids. His restraint forced everyone else to reflect instead of react. Clips of his walkout continued to play in classrooms and professional seminars. At Columbia Journalism School, a graduate student presented her thesis titled The Ethics of Ambush Interviews, Lessons from Keanu Reeves. Her conclusion read, "When humility becomes the story, ego collapses. What we witnessed was not a scandal, it was a correction. Even networks that once thrived on controversy began changing tone. A new generation of producers started pitching shows focused on authenticity, empathy, and solution-driven conversations. Quietly, television was evolving. Across social media, viewers continued to interpret his silence in personal ways. One woman from Seattle tweeted, "He said nothing, but I heard everything." Another wrote, "He didn't cancel anyone. He just walked away." That's real power. And while the world dissected the meaning of his stillness, Keanu lived it. He was spotted hiking alone in the hills outside Malibu, stopping to take pictures with fans and thanking them softly before disappearing down the trail. A few days later, someone filmed him waiting in line at a small bookstore, holding a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He paid in cash, smiled at the cashier, and left without saying a word about the ongoing media storm that still surrounded his name. The footage went viral again, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. People were moved by how completely he resisted spectacle. He had become a mirror to the culture, showing how peace could be louder than outrage. Back in New York, media professors updated their syllabi. The chapter once labeled The Rise of Opinion Television now had a new subheading, The Fall of Performance Ethics. Underneath, a simple note. Read, "See Keanu Reeves, 2025. Joy Behar's moment of confrontation, meanwhile, had been edited and dissected into hundreds of cautionary clips used in communication seminars. Professors paused the video when she interrupted, asking their students, "At what moment does debate become ego?" It became a lesson in restraint, a reminder that conviction without compassion becomes cruelty. Months passed. The world moved on to other stories, other scandals. Yet when those faded, Keanu's words remained soft echoes that continued to shape conversations long after the lights of the studio had gone dark. He was asked one final time, in a passing question during a charity gala, if he would ever address the interview again. He smiled and said quietly, "I already did, by not saying more." And with that, he walked away once more, leaving behind a legacy of silence that spoke louder than any defense ever could. 3 weeks after the storm had finally settled, life began to look ordinary again, or at least as ordinary as it could for a man who had unknowingly changed the tone of an entire nation. Keanu Reeves was spotted one chilly morning in Los Angeles, carrying 2 canvas bags filled with books and small toys. He wore jeans, an old brown jacket, and the same pair of worn boots fans had seen him in countless times before. Paparazzi trailed him from a distance, expecting a new statement, a new headline. But Keanu didn't look their way. He simply walked toward the entrance of a children's hospital, nodded politely to the guard, and disappeared through the doors. Inside, the halls were decorated with paper hearts and colorful handprints. Nurses whispered and smiled when they saw him, but he asked for no attention. He placed the bags on a table in the common room, unloading storybooks, stuffed animals, and puzzles. A little girl with a bandaged arm approached timidly, holding a crayon drawing of the sunset. "For me?" he asked softly. She nodded shyly. "You look like my grandpa, but younger," he laughed, crouching beside her. "Then I must be very lucky." For the next hour, Keanu read aloud from Charlotte's Web to a circle of children gathered around him. His voice was steady and kind. Every few minutes, a nurse peeked through the doorway, listening, smiling, trying not to interrupt. When he finished, one of the older boys asked, "Are you famous?" Keanu looked thoughtful. "I guess some people might think so," he said. "But what matters is that we're here right now. That's the part I care about." The boy grinned. "Then you're my favorite not famous person," Keanu chuckled. "That's the best title I've ever had." Outside, photographers waited for him to emerge. When he finally stepped through the hospital doors, they shouted questions about The View, about Joy Behar, about the network scandal still being dissected online. He didn't respond. He waved once to the crowd of fans who had gathered near the parking lot, smiled, and drove away in his old black motorcycle. Later that evening, a nurse uploaded a single photo to social media. Keanu sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children, reading from the book. The caption read, "No cameras, no speeches, just stories and kindness." The image went viral overnight, but this time, no one argued. There were no debates, no political spins, just quiet admiration. Meanwhile, his latest film, The Guardian: Redemption, continued to dominate the global box office. Critics called it his most emotionally mature performance to date. Fans lined up outside theaters not just for the movie, but to support the man who had become a symbol of grounded humanity. Entertainment magazines printed headlines like, "Keanu's grace outshines Hollywood noise," and "The actor who taught the world to listen." But to him, none of it mattered. The noise outside didn't touch the peace he carried within. In the weeks that followed, the world's attention slowly shifted to other stories. Political races, new scandals, celebrity feuds. The frenzy faded, but Keanu's calm remained etched in people's memories, like a quiet reminder of what grace looked like under pressure. He resumed filming his next project in Vancouver, showing up early every day, greeting crew members by name, and helping electricians move cables between takes. A production assistant later posted online, "He's exactly the same as he's always been, polite, focused, kind. It's like that whole TV explosion never even happened." When a reporter visited the set, hoping for a quote, Keanu smiled warmly and said, "I think we've said enough for a while, don't you?" Then he thanked the journalist for coming and went right back to work. That simple exchange became another viral moment. His reputation, already solid before the controversy, now seemed almost untouchable. For many, he had become more than an actor. He was a reference point, a living reminder that decency could endure in a world spinning faster than ever. A column in Time captured it perfectly. Keanu Reeves represents the rare kind of man who can endure chaos without bitterness. He's not perfect, he's human, but in a culture obsessed with outrage, he chose peace. And in doing so, he made humility radical again. Fan mail poured into his agency by the thousands. Veterans, teachers, and single parents wrote letters thanking him for restoring their faith in quiet strength. One note from a retired nurse in Oklahoma read, "You didn't argue, you didn't perform, you just stood your ground with grace. The world needs more of that." Keanu didn't read most of the letters himself. His assistant compiled them into a box labeled "Kind Words." He kept it in his living room beside a small table where he lit a candle every morning. Sometimes, when he needed grounding after a long day, he would pick one at random and read it aloud to himself. Despite the storm that had surrounded him, he never once spoke negatively about Joy Behar or the show. When asked privately by a friend whether he felt vindicated, he simply replied, "No one wins when kindness becomes a competition." That quiet wisdom became its own kind of legacy. On the first anniversary of the View incident, fans around the world marked the date online, not with anger, but with acts of compassion. People donated to hospitals, shelters, and schools. They posted photos of themselves volunteering, using the hashtag #QuietCourage. Keanu's name trended again, but this time it wasn't about drama, it was about inspiration. When a journalist asked him years later what he learned from it all, Keanu smiled gently. "Nothing new," he said. "Just that kindness still works." It was the simplest truth of all the one he'd been living long before cameras tried to capture it. And so, life went on. The noise faded. The world returned to its pace. But somewhere between the hospital visits, the long film sets, and the silent rides home on his motorcycle, Keanu Reeves carried the same steady heart that had changed millions without trying to. 6 months later, the night of the Oscars arrived. The Dolby Theater shimmered beneath golden lights, its red carpet stretching like a river of glitter and flashbulbs. Every major outlet in Hollywood was broadcasting live, and every journalist in the building had one question written in their notes: would Keanu Reeves finally win the award that had eluded him his entire career? He arrived without a publicist or entourage, wearing a classic black tuxedo that looked as modest as he did. His hair was slightly longer, streaked with a touch of silver, and his calm smile disarmed the usual chaos of reporters shouting questions. When asked how he felt, he simply replied, "Grateful to be here." Then he gave a small wave and stepped inside. Inside the theater, the energy was electric. The Guardian, Redemption had dominated the year's nominations, and his performance, quiet, restrained, achingly human, had moved audiences around the world. Many critics said it was the culmination of his entire life's philosophy brought to the screen: grace under fire, compassion in chaos. As the ceremony unfolded, Keanu sat near the front, beside Sandra Bullock, who squeezed his hand every time his film was mentioned. When the montage of Best Actor nominees played, the audience fell silent as Keanu's clip appeared, his character kneeling beside a dying man, whispering, "Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." The applause that followed was long, warm, and deeply emotional. Finally, the moment arrived. The presenter stepped to the microphone, the envelope in her trembling hands. "And the Oscar for Best Actor goes to..." She smiled before finishing. "Keanu Reeves." For a split second, the room froze, and then it erupted. The applause was thunderous, rising like a wave that wouldn't stop. Keanu blinked, visibly moved. Before standing, he hugged Sandra, embraced his director, and walked slowly to the stage. When he reached the podium, he paused. The applause kept going. People were standing now, actors, producers, technicians, even members of the orchestra pit. The camera panned across faces streaked with tears and smiles that looked like they'd been waiting years for this moment. Keanu took a breath, adjusted the microphone, and spoke in the same steady tone the world had come to know. "Thank you," he began simply. The word hung in the air, like a prayer. He looked out across the sea of faces. "This means a lot, not because of the trophy, but because of what it represents. It represents every person who works hard, lives with integrity, and tries to make the world a little better quietly." The audience erupted again, but he gently lifted a hand, asking for calm. His voice softened. "I've been blessed to play characters who fight for good, but real heroism doesn't happen in front of cameras. It happens when no one's watching, when you choose kindness over cynicism, patience over pride." His words settled over the room like light snowfall, quiet but impossible to ignore. Keanu glanced down at the golden statue in his hand, then back up to the crowd. "I share this with everyone who gets up every morning and tries again," he said softly. "With the nurses, the teachers, the single parents, the workers who build the world we live in. You don't need a stage to matter. You don't need applause to make a difference." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. It cut through the glamour of the evening and reached something real. The camera caught glimpses of Meryl Streep dabbing her eyes, Tom Hanks nodding solemnly, and Denzel Washington whispering to his wife. "That's the speech of the decade," Keanu continued, his tone steady but emotional. "I've been lucky to do what I love for a long time, but the older I get, the more I realize that the people who inspire me aren't the ones who win trophies. They're the ones who stay kind, who keep showing up, who forgive even when it's hard." The applause swelled again, but he didn't stop. "6 months ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was reminded how loud the world can be when we forget to listen. But I also saw what happens when we choose grace instead of anger. It changes everything. He didn't mention Joy Behar. He didn't mention the controversy. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room and everyone watching at home knew exactly what he meant. A hush fell over the audience as he paused to collect himself. "This isn't my moment," he said finally. "It belongs to everyone who's ever been told that kindness makes them weak. I promise you it doesn't. It makes you unbreakable." The theater went still for a long heartbeat. Then the applause began again. Slow at first, then thunderous. The audience rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. The ovation didn't stop. Cameras captured tears in the eyes of men and women who had spent their lives chasing applause, realizing they were applauding something far greater than fame. Keanu stood quietly through it all, humbled, almost shy. When he finally leaned toward the microphone again, he simply said, "Thank you for listening." The ovation grew louder, stretching into minutes. It was as though the world itself refused to let the moment end. The orchestra began to play softly, but no one sat down. People wanted to remember this feeling, a moment where humility triumphed over spectacle, where kindness took center stage. As he walked off stage, holding the statue close, Sandra Bullock met him in the wings and wrapped her arms around him. "You just changed Hollywood again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I just said what I meant." Backstage, reporters crowded the hallway, shouting questions. "Keanu, what did you mean by your speech? Do you forgive your critics? Is there anything you'd like to say to Joy Behar?" He stopped, only once, turning toward them with the same calm composure he'd carried through every storm. "There's nothing to forgive," he said gently. "We're all learning." Then he slipped through the curtain and out of sight, leaving behind a silence so pure it felt sacred. That night, social media filled with one sentence repeated by millions around the world. He didn't win an award. He won respect. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of ordinary life among nurses, teachers, parents, and workers, the applause continued, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Long after the applause faded, long after the gold curtains of the Oscars fell and the lights dimmed, something remained. It wasn't the sound of cheering crowds or the shine of the trophy in Keanu's hand. It was the quiet understanding that he had just taught the world something deeper than any speech or performance could convey. The morning after his win, the headlines all carried the same message. Keanu Reeves redefines what it means to be a hero. The actor who chose grace over ego, a lesson in dignity, not drama. It wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about character. Across coffee shops, classrooms, and factory floors, people talked about that moment. They didn't debate politics or gossip about Hollywood scandals. They talked about how a man had walked into a storm of arrogance and walked out unbroken. Parents shared clips of his speech with their kids. Teachers used it in class discussions about respect. Soldiers overseas said it reminded them why quiet leadership mattered. It wasn't the confrontation that people remembered. It was the calm, the way Keanu never raised his voice, the way he never stooped to anger, the way he proved that real power doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from refusing to lose your integrity. In a world addicted to outrage, he became a symbol of something rare: composure. That strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. That grace that can stand in a storm without breaking. He didn't fight fire with fire. He fought ego with empathy, and somehow that made him unforgettable. Reporters tried to get him to talk about the moment, to turn it into a movement, but he never did. He didn't write a memoir, didn't start a campaign, didn't do a press tour. He just kept living, helping, listening, showing up. That was his statement. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the standing ovation, not the trending hashtags, not even the Oscar. The victory was that millions of people saw what humility could look like when it stands tall. He had reminded the world of something it had nearly forgotten, that true heroism doesn't perform, it simply is. In time, his words became more than quotes. They became reminders on office walls, captions beneath photos of kindness, phrases written on the chalkboards of small-town schools. You don't need applause to make a difference. Kindness still works. Real heroism happens when no one's watching. Those lines became part of the culture, echoes of a man who never tried to be a symbol, but became one anyway. And through it all, Keanu stayed the same. He still rode the subway. He still stopped for fans on the street. He still gave quietly, without fanfare. The storm around him had passed, but his calm never did. As one journalist wrote, he didn't just defend his reputation that day. He defended the idea that goodness doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to keep showing up. Months later, the clip of Keanu's calm defiance still circulated online, shared not for outrage, but for hope. It became a quiet anthem in a noisy world, a moment people turned to when they were tired of cynicism and needed proof that dignity still existed. There was something timeless about the image of him standing on that stage, tall, composed, and steady, refusing to let provocation dictate his response. He had proven that silence can sometimes speak louder than any argument, that it's possible to be strong without cruelty, to stand firm without hate. When asked in an interview years later about that infamous television moment, Keanu smiled faintly and said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about remembering who I was." That one line spread across the internet again, reminding everyone that self-control is the highest form of strength. He had faced judgment and mockery, but instead of fighting back, he had chosen stillness. That stillness became power. The kind of power that can't be bought, staged, or rehearsed. It comes only from truth. People began to see the difference between performance and authenticity, between shouting about virtue and living it. Keanu had shown the world that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes, it's the quiet one who refuses to play the game. As time went on, even those who once criticized him began to understand. They saw the consequences of a culture obsessed with outrage, and they recognized the grace it takes to stay kind when attacked. His restraint had aged better than any confrontation ever could. The moment he walked away from that television set had become symbolic not of rebellion, but of maturity, of a man refusing to trade his peace for anyone's applause. It was as if the universe had conspired to remind everyone watching that day, you can disagree without dehumanizing. You can defend yourself without destroying others. In the end, Keanu Reeves didn't just walk off a talk show. He walked into history as a reminder that respect is not a weakness, it's a legacy. And that legacy continued to ripple outward in classrooms, in boardrooms, in quiet moments when someone chose to listen instead of shout. The camera fades one last time on his quiet smile, that familiar look of calm that says everything words can't. And then the voiceover, soft but resolute. True heroism doesn't perform, it simply is. Keanu Reeves reminded the world that kindness can stand its ground. He didn't win an argument, he won respect. A moment of silence. Then, the final line. If you believe dignity still matters in this world, like, share, and subscribe. Because real strength doesn't shout, it stands.